So you're new to Genshin, and as you're playing through the game, you're finding out that all these different elements have different reactions with each other. And in this video, we're going to talk about Overloaded. I'm Kessie, Mango, whatever the hell you want to call me. And because not every Genshin player is AR60 with 36-star Abyss, I decided that I'm going to make videos that hopefully everybody can understand no matter what adventure rank you are. So if you do learn something from this video, I'd really appreciate it if you liked it, commented, subscribed, all that fun stuff. And with that being said, let's get into this beginner guide for Overloaded. So Genshin does make an attempt at explaining these reactions in this domain called Temple of the Lion in Mondstadt, as you can see right here. And I highly recommend you going and doing this domain to learn about Overloaded, but it does leave some things out. And we're going to talk about what it talks about, as well as the things that it leaves out. So Overloaded is the reaction between Pyro and Electro. And as you can see right here, it is described as doing an explosion that deals AoE pyro damage. Because it says AoE pyro damage, you might think that it also is going to inflict pyro onto the enemies, right? It is not going to inflict pyro onto the enemies or surrounding enemies. Once you do this reaction, it uses up a lot of energy. And it leaves the enemy with no element on them. Now, this reaction is a reaction that relies on the elemental mastery of the character triggering it for the damage. So for today's video, for today's team, we are going to be using Klee, who is the most adorable arson in the game. We are going to be using Benny for a little bit more controlled pyro usage. We are going to be using Beidou. She was on the last banner, and her burst does really good electro application. And of course, good old Kuki Shinobu, who is one of my mains with a solid 795 elemental mastery. Now, the reason that we are using Kuki and Beidou specifically is because they have a big difference in elemental mastery. So we're going to be using them to show the difference in damage between a character that is built with elemental mastery and a character that is not built with elemental mastery. And along with elemental mastery, it is going to take into account the level of the character triggering the reaction. That is a big phrase that you have to remember. It is the character triggering the reaction. We are going to be applying Pyro first and then allowing the Electro to cause the reaction. That is what we want. We want Electro to go second, not first. We want Electro to cause the reaction, not Pyro. So because of how this reaction works, we are going to want some on-field characters as well as off-field damaging characters. Beidou and Kuki are our two off-field. Klee and Bennett are our two on-field. Okay, so we are going to start by just showing the overload reaction. So first, we're going to apply some Pyro. We are going to get many characters with Pyro on them. We're going to swap to Kuki, trigger her skill, and there you go. We got the overload reaction. That is going to be doing 14,456 damage. Now, you notice that once it hit, there was no elemental mark above the enemy's head. It is because overload reactions use a lot of energy, and it's not going to leave any element on the enemy. So if we let Klee trigger the overload instead of Kuki, we are going to get much less damage, right? 3,729 versus Kuki's, 14,000. That is because Klee does not have elemental mastery. That is what I mean by we want Electro triggering the reactions, because I specifically have Kuki built elemental mastery. You want the second element being applied to be your high elemental mastery. So what we can do to kind of show a decent rotation is we're going to go to Kuki, trigger that, go back to Klee, and just hit him with Pyro, right? Let Kuki's skill pulse, trigger the overloads. Of course, you're not going to be perfect all the time. That's okay. We just want to apply Pyro so that way Kuki's skill can trigger the overload reaction, even though she's not on the field. So we're just going to be applying Pyro, constantly applying Pyro, constantly, using Klee's burst to apply Pyro to a lot of enemies, so that way when Kuki's skill pulses, it does the higher elemental mastery overload damage. That is what we want. That is why we also want off-field as well as on-field. And as always, we are going to go back and rewatch these in slow motion and kind of break down exactly what's happening and what can be done better. So time to look at it in slow motion. So Klee applies the pyro and we swap to Kuki. When Kuki uses her skill, the overload reaction does 14,456. So the skill damage itself does around 1,100. But if we have Kuki apply the electro first, then Klee is only going to cause an overload of about 6,800 versus the 14,000 that Kuki does. Again, you're not going to be able to get it timed correctly every shot, but just applying the pyro in between Kuki's skill pulse is gonna be the best way to have constant overload reactions. So now we're gonna look at Beidou. Now Beidou's burst is phenomenal for off-field electro application. So we are gonna mix her again with Klee. We are going to apply pyro, go to Beidou, use her burst, cause the overload. Now you also see though how much lower damage Beidou is doing versus Kuki, because Beidou has a much lower elemental mastery. Beidou is level 80, so that's not going to be a big difference. It is going to be all in that elemental mastery. So now for the slow motion. So we have Klee again applying the pyro, and then we're going to go to Beidou to use her burst. Now, her overload is only doing 2,988. I believe Beidou's elemental mastery is below 100. Her burst is amazing at spreading that electro around, and if she was built with EM, then she would be fantastic at damage with this kind of reaction. But that is just how much of a difference elemental mastery makes in this particular reaction. So now we're going to talk about if this reaction is good for Swirling. Swirling being introducing an Anemo character and taking one of these four out. So what we are going to do is we're going to actually take out Beidou and we're going to put in Sucrose. Now my Sucrose is an elemental mastery build. I think she has like 550, but she's only level 60. So her reactions won't be as big as Kuki's, but they will be more than Beidou's. Now, before we go in there, this is not necessarily beginner friendly, but I did want to talk about this because this is a tactic that you can use later on. Now, my Sucrose does have the VV set, the Viridescent Veneer artifact set. And you can see right here that it decreases opponent's elemental resistance to the element infused in the swirl by 40%. Now, this is really important because Overload says it does a Pyro AoE explosion. So if we can swirl Pyro, then we can do more damage with Overload. So that is going to be our goal. Our goal is going to be to swirl Pyro with her skill to decrease their resistance and also to spread around the Pyro before we activate Kuki's skill. So we're going to apply Pyro to this one. We are going to swirl, and you see these other characters now have Pyro on them. We are going to hit them, and you see 20,000 damage, 19,970. That is crazy. Swirl again, and you see even her swirling caused the overload reaction because there was Pyro and Electro on the field. So we are going to try to get her burst to pick up Pyro, not Electro. So what we're going to do is we are going to drop Benny's burst. Oops, we're going to drop Benny's burst. There we go. And now we're going to go to Kuki. And you can see, look at all of those reactions. That was crazy. If I could have timed it better, it would have been so good. Side note, for any higher AR players that are watching that are saying that the increase in damage is coming from Sucrose's Elemental Mastery passives, I ran it again with Jean. And using VV to decrease Pyro resistance does, in fact, increase the damage of Overload. All right, now time for the slow-mo. So, like always, we are going to apply Pyro first. Then we are going to go to Sucrose and we're going to swirl it. And it spreads around to the other two enemies that were caught in the swirl. Then we're going to go to Kuki, hit the skill. Nearly 20,000 damage is crazy to me for Overload. That's just crazy. Okay, so now we're gonna look at Sucrose's burst. And I really just want to see all these reactions. That's mainly what I'm doing here. I could have done Benny's burst first instead, and then immediately swapped to Kooky. I just got off on my timing, but look at how many reactions that hits. That's absolutely crazy to me. So that is going to be it for the overload reaction. Now, as a beginner, you do have access to, I did not mean to make Lee jump. You have access to Amber and Lisa, which can cause this reaction. You also have access to the Animo Traveler for Swirling. So if you do want to do this reaction, you probably want to put your Elemental Mastery on Lisa, because when you level her up and ascend her, she gains Elemental Mastery. Using Amber's Baron Bunny and Animo Traveler to swirl Pyro around for Lisa to cause the reaction with her higher Elemental Mastery. And with that being said, that's going to be it for this video. If you did learn something, please like, please subscribe, please comment, all that fun stuff, and I will see you in the next video.